was a royal resort. In fact, King Herod the Great built a lavish winter palace there to enjoy. It was a beautiful and wealthy oasis city. And because of its strategic position near the Jordan River, Jericho was a highly prosperous hub for the merchants, religious pilgrims, and political elites. Jericho kind of had the who's who of people. It was one of those places where most people there, a lot of people there, were very well-to-do, very wealthy. There really wasn't much of a middle class. If you weren't part of that elite class, then you were part of the poor people. And trying to beg from very rich people, it could be very difficult. We do know Zacchaeus was a tax collector. In fact, he was a chief tax collector. We know that he was rich. And we also get a glimpse into what the people thought of Zacchaeus, because they grumbled to themselves, what in the world is Jesus doing, making himself a guest in the house of this sinner? So we also know the people didn't think much of Zacchaeus, and why would they? We know what it's like in that day and age for tax collectors. They weren't the most well-liked people. They weren't people that people looked up to or wanted to be like or anything. The tax collectors were despised individuals of Israel. They were usually Jewish men who were out there doing the work of the Roman government. And a lot of people considered them to be sellouts, usually taking more than what they were supposed to take. They were thieves. They were defrauding people. They were getting extra for themselves. And this is how Zacchaeus became so wealthy and so rich. Zacchaeus was in a position that whatever he wanted, he could get. So the first thing I want to talk about this morning is this. Zacchaeus had a determination to have a visitation from Jesus. Zacchaeus was determined to have a visitation from Jesus. Now, I think it would be fair to say that Zacchaeus was not a very well-liked man. He was not on everybody's top of the list of who they want to be with. He was a tax collector. And from the limited information that we have here, two things actually we can gather. There's two things that are working against Zacchaeus. One is that he is a tax collector, and he is in a position where people are not going to like him too much. Jericho would have been about a couple days' walk south of the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus was doing most of his ministry, was up there. And about 2 days' walk south is where Jericho is. So Jesus didn't spend a lot of time in Jericho. And yet, Jesus' reputation preceded him. When Jesus did come, the crowds heard about it, and they wanted to see Jesus. There was a crowd that was gathering. They heard about this miracle worker, and here he comes. He's going to be in their city. A crowd starts forming all around him, and Zacchaeus wants to be part of this crowd. Yeah, I want to see this Jesus. But again, something is working against him. He's not a very well-liked man. When there's a crowd that's forming, this crowd didn't say, oh, there's Zacchaeus. Everybody make way, part the way so Zacchaeus can come and be front in line so he can see Jesus. No, nobody was going to try to help out Zacchaeus to get what he wanted. They weren't going to make way for him and help him out. In fact, they're going to do everything they can to hurt him if all possible. No, we're going to squeeze him out. He can stay out there. We want to see Jesus just as much as he does. And so nobody was going out of their way to help Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus had some obstacles because of who he was. He had a reputation that people didn't like. He had obstacles where he was a man that was a rejection, really. People rejected him and who he was, what he was about. He was unworthy in the eyes of other people. That's why they said, why in the world would Jesus be a guest in this man's house? He's so unworthy. He's unworthy because of the way he treated people, how he hurt others, how he took advantage of other people. And I think if we think about it, there's a possibility that we look back throughout the stories of our life, we might find there was times when we hurt people. There might have been times when we kind of took advantage of people maybe, where we hurt feelings, we hurt relationships that we had with people. We put ourselves in a position where we didn't get along with someone or what have you, and now find ourselves rejected by that person. If we think back on, there might be times when we might kind of understand where Zacchaeus might be coming from just a little bit, at least in certain scenarios of our life. For some, it might be something that big happened in our lives, something that haunts us to this day. Every time we look back on it, we back at it with regret. I wish I could take that day back. I wish I never would have done this or never would have done that. I wish I would have treated this person better. We might look back on our life sometimes and look at regrets when we look at certain stories of our life. For some, it might not even be something big. It might be just a collection of small things where we might not have been nice to people. We had that reputation of being short with people. We might have, whatever it may be, it just adds up over time. For some of us, we might feel like we were the ones that were rejected, either by parents growing up, by family, by friends, whatever it may be. We know what rejection feels like, and we don't like the way it feels, and we don't want to be rejected again. These were the obstacles that Zacchaeus was facing when he wanted to see Jesus. And the problem is, when we have those feelings and we feel like we might be the ones rejected, or we might be the one who hurt people, and we're the ones that don't have the good reputation, or whatever we might feel, it sometimes transports over to Jesus and says, you know what? If other people don't like me, who's to say Jesus will like me? If other people are rejecting me, maybe Jesus would reject me. If I'm having a hard time being forgiven by others, how in the world can someone like Jesus ever forgive me? And sometimes those thoughts might go through some of our minds. And here's the thing, that's only one of the obstacles. Zacchaeus had another obstacle. He was a short man. It's not like he could just look over the crowd and say, okay, there he is, I see him. He was one of those people who it's not even a matter of being liked or not in this particular obstacle. It's just a matter of maybe feeling overlooked. And I'm not trying to make a short joke there, but that's kind of what's happening. He was overlooked by people. He was so short, he couldn't see over the people. He couldn't make his way through the crowd. And sometimes people feel overlooked as well. Will Jesus ever think of someone like me? Does Jesus even know anything about me? Does Jesus even have time for someone as insignificant as me? You know, we live in a world that's very easy to blend in with. Just fit in with the crowd. We've got crowds everywhere, and you can just kind of blend in. I'm one of those guys, typically, if I'm in a group of people, I kind of like to be the one who just blends in. Right? I'm not usually the one who talks the most. If we're in a crowd of people, I'm the introvert. I like to keep to myself, right? Yep, see, I know others feel the same way. I mean, listen, I can stand in the back of a sanctuary in the back, and my face will still turn beet red when I hear those happy birthday song. Because that's not me. I like to blend in. Right? Earlier this week, in fact, I was at a restaurant, and I happened to notice that one of my old neighbors, he moved away years ago, he was there. And you know, one of the most one of the things that you're never sure of, it could be the most awkward parts of things, is if when you come up to somebody, you kind of know them, but you're thinking, I don't know if they know me or not. And you're looking at each other like, do we know each other? And nobody wants to say the first word. And you say, do I wave? No, because they probably doesn't know who I am. And that's what's happening with this neighbor. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to say a word because I don't think he knows who I am. Even when he lived next to me, we always just kind of waved. We didn't really talk to each other. If Aaron was with me, he would know who Aaron was, right? There's no problem with that. She's the one who goes and delivers fudge to all of our neighbors every year. He knows who she is. She has the fudge, right? Not me. And so I kind of just let it go, right? Because I like to blend in. And sometimes we blend in because there's just a vast of people sometimes. And we blend in and we think, you know what? Nobody notices. Nobody even would know I'm there or not. And here's why this matters. Because I look at a Bible verse like John 3:16. For God so loved the world. And it's a beautiful verse. So much impact. It's powerful. It means so much. But for people like me who are introverts and just blend in and so forth, what could happen is you hear a verse that says, "For God so loved the world," and you think, well, it must be good for the world. It's good that God notices the world, but you're waiting to notice or think, well, he noticed me. It's one thing to notice the world, but what about just little old me who blends in, who's just part of the crowd? Does he even recognize me? And David, in the same vein of thought, he writes this beautiful song. A psalm that we should just take it to heart, because for anybody who ever feels, I just blend in, for anybody who feels like I don't know if God will notice me specifically, Psalm 139, he says this, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, and I cannot attain it." I wonder how many people in our world today need to know that. How many people need to know there's a God out there, and yes, he loves the world, but more than that, he loves you. Yes, he wants the world to come to him, and he wants the world to know him, but he wants you to know him. I wonder how many people are sitting in churches all around the world today who need to hear that. We sit in these churches, and it's sometimes it's just as easy in churches as anywhere else to blend in. And we come in, and we sit down, we go through the service, and we go home, and sometimes we wonder, but did God recognize me? And David says, yes, he knows you. He loves you. He searches you. And he's right. I cannot even attain it. I can't even comprehend it. How the God of the universe would care for someone like me and want to know me. All people have a desire to be known. And it may feel like no one on this earth cares for you or knows you, but God knows you. And he cares for you. He knows you better than you know yourself. That's how well God knows you. And for Zacchaeus, he has these obstacles of people do not like me. People are trying to keep me away. He has this obstacle of I'm just blending in. I'm not standing out. But he has a determination. I've got to see Jesus. A determination inside of him, I've still got to get to him. I'm not going to let him walk by without me laying eyes on him. I've got to see him. Nothing was going to stop him. The crowds couldn't push him out. He wasn't going to be overlooked by Jesus. Even the thoughts in his mind that says, why try? He didn't even listen to that. I've got to see Jesus. He was determined. I pray to God we have a determination for all of us to see Jesus like this. We got to see Jesus. Now, Luke doesn't even tell us why Zacchaeus had this determination. We're not given the backstory of why. Again, Jesus didn't make it down to Jericho very often. What is it that Zacchaeus heard, or what did he know that he says, I've got to see him? We don't know. We don't know. I mentioned this earlier, but Zacchaeus, he was a rich man. So what that tells us is this. If he was in need of something, he'd buy it. If he had a physical need or whatever it may be, he could take care of it. We have no record that tells us that Zacchaeus was sick. And what I'm trying to tell you is this. Zacchaeus didn't come to Jesus saying, Jesus, I need to be healed. Jesus, I need this or I need that. He didn't have any of that. He didn't have these physical, tangible needs that would say, I need to pursue Jesus to get my miracle, to get my healing. He didn't have that. Most people, when they are seeking Jesus, that we find in scriptures, they were seeking him for a reason. Jesus, I need this healing. Jesus, I need my family to be touched. Jesus, I need to regain what I lost. Whatever it may be, people were always seeking Jesus for a reason. And Luke says, I don't have a reason to give you. Zacchaeus was pursuing Jesus for the sake of pursuing Jesus, which is amazing to me. He just wanted a visitation from Jesus. He says, I want Jesus so I can have Jesus. And listen, we pray for things, and I'm fine with that. I really, really am. But sometimes we just need to seek Jesus for Jesus. I know we seek him for the healing, and we should. We seek him for all those other, to be healed from our hurts, whatever. All those things are great. But first and foremost, let's seek Jesus for Jesus. I need Jesus. I just need a visitation from him. Sometimes the hardest people in the world to reach for Jesus are the ones who have it all. Everything's good in their life. They don't have a physical need. They don't have hurt. They don't have these things. They just live in life. They don't have Jesus, but everything's good, right? And there's a lot of people in this world that can tell you that. There's these people who are nice. There are people who are givers. They're volunteers. They're this and that. They're great people. Everybody likes them. They're nice enough, but they don't have Jesus. How do you reach them for Jesus? Because generally we come to Jesus because we need something, right? But really what ends up happening is we all were in need of Jesus because we don't need the physical, we need the spiritual. Yeah. And every single one of us needed that. We were all in the same boat there. We need Jesus. And I think of Zacchaeus, the determination. It's one thing, look, I'm a father, and so if one of my kids was super sick or what have you, I would do everything I could. I would be determined to make sure that not only were they prayed for and cared for, I would make sure whatever I can do within my ability and my power to make sure something happens for my child, right? I would be determined to make sure that was going to happen. Zacchaeus didn't have that. He had a determination, but not for something to pursue after for a child, for a family member, or even for himself. He had a determination. I just need Jesus. And in my viewpoint, what a great place to be. A place to say, you know what? I'm not seeking for this physical stuff. I'm not seeking for the physical needs or tangible things. I'm just seeking Jesus. I think that's a great place to be. That's why I want us to have the same kind of determination as Zacchaeus. Determined to have Jesus just for Jesus himself. Zacchaeus, he can get whatever he needed. But what he found out was the things that he could get or acquire on his own was no longer enough. He didn't need more things that he can get himself. What he needed something that he couldn't get himself, and it was what Jesus was offering. Jesus is offering peace and joy and contentment, and more than everything, salvation. And Zacchaeus couldn't buy any of that. He couldn't obtain any of that himself. I need to get this from Jesus. And Zacchaeus could have come up with a million reasons to not get this from Jesus, to not be determined. He could have been a million reasons to say, you know what? This crowd, they hate me so much, they're never going to let me see Jesus. I'm never going to make my way through this crowd. You know what? I'm so short, I'm not going to I can't do this. He could come up with a million reasons why it was not going to work. But you know what? He said, I'm going to be determined to see Jesus no matter what. Even if I look foolish. Some rich guy in fancy clothes climbing a tree. Look pretty ridiculous, I would imagine. What is that guy doing? But you know what? He's like, even if I look foolish to this world, I've got to see Jesus. We need that kind of determination sometimes too. Sometimes what holds us back is what are other people going to think? What will other people do if I do this or if I do that? I don't want to look foolish. He says, I don't care, whatever it takes. Because something that Zacchaeus needed to know, does God care for me? Zacchaeus needed to know it. And nothing was going to stand in his way. There are some people who need Jesus, either for whatever it may be. But for some, they need Jesus just to be saved, just for salvation's sake. And yet, they come up with a million excuses like Zacchaeus could have done. You know what? I don't think Jesus would love me enough. I don't think Jesus has time for me. I don't think I've done too much in my past. I've been rejected too long. A million reasons that people come up with saying, you know what? I just don't think Jesus cares. Maybe I'll wait the next time Jesus comes by to Jericho. Maybe I'll delay it. Whatever it may be, people can come up with a million excuses, but not Zacchaeus. He says, I have determination. I need to see Jesus. And here's what Zacchaeus found. So now that was the first thing. It was Zacchaeus had a determination to have a visitation from Jesus. But here's what he also found. Determination leads to change. Determination leads to change. It was not uncommon that when people approached Jesus, Jesus would ask them, what do you seek from me? Or what can I do for you? Some form of that question. What do you want me to do for you? And if you noticed, Jesus didn't ask Zacchaeus that at all. Jesus knew exactly what Zacchaeus was seeking after and pursuing after. Jesus just saw Zacchaeus say, look, that determination, he's up in a tree. He says, hey, come on down here. Let's go to your house. No questions asked. The people always ask for tangible things, the healings and the miracles. But Zacchaeus was after something much deeper. Something that would affect his spirit and his heart and his soul. Something he couldn't get on himself. He was looking for change. And Jesus knew it. And Zacchaeus' determination led to that change. Again, Zacchaeus could have bought anything he wanted. But the thing that he needed the most, he couldn't buy himself. He couldn't get it himself. So his determination to get to Jesus led to that change. And just like anyone who's met Jesus, Zacchaeus' life was changed. We all have testimonies. I know. I've heard them. When we've met Jesus, our lives changed. No longer the same. Zacchaeus was a sinner. And he knew it. The crowd definitely knew it. And Jesus knew it. And yet, Jesus looks at Zacchaeus. And he saw determination. And Zacchaeus says, you know what? I'm not going to stay this way, though. I found someone who could change this. Zacchaeus was up in a tree. He's out of sight. He's out of the way. When Jesus starts passing by. And Jesus comes right up to him. He looks him in the eye and calls him by name. The very man he thought he might be overlooked. Maybe Jesus doesn't have time for me. No, he comes and calls him by name. Isaiah 43:1 says this. But now thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Do you remember the first time you heard Jesus call out your name? Do you remember what it did in here for you? Again, I know I keep saying this. The God of the universe, though, knows my name. Called me by name and said, you are mine. Of all the billions of people in the world, he says, I got time for you right now. You're mine. Jesus looked at Zacchaeus, and you know what he saw? He saw exactly who Zacchaeus was. A man who had problems, a man who had failures, a man who had disappointments, a man who was a sinner, who made mistakes, a man who was hated by others. Jesus saw Zacchaeus for exactly who he was and said, guess what, Zacchaeus? I want to come to your house. What's Jesus doing? Jesus is inviting himself into Zacchaeus' life. That's what Jesus is doing. Zacchaeus, I want to be part of your life. Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me. Jesus, I'm at your door, Zacchaeus, because I care for you. Yes, I know who you are. I know what you've done. I know all of these things, and you know what? I still want you. I'm inviting myself into your life, Zacchaeus. And all Zacchaeus had to do was open the door and let him in. And he did. Joyfully. He comes down that tree and he joyfully accepts Jesus, receives Jesus. And Zacchaeus' life was forever changed. It was Zacchaeus' determination that got him up into that tree. And it was the love of Christ that got him down. We need that kind of determination because it leads to change. changes us for who we are. Zacchaeus had a change of heart. He said that he wanted to repay people and make things right. He said that he would repay back fourfold and all of that. He's willing to do it. That, by the way, just as a side note, that's not Zacchaeus saying, hey, let me do all this so I can get the salvation. That was the fruit of the salvation. That's what happens when a heart is changed. A heart is changed, and immediately you started to see the fruit of it right there, saying, look, I want to repay people. He wasn't trying to buy salvation. He already had it. You see the fruit of it immediately. But now, that's just half of the story. Hang in there with me, all right? This is the shorter half now. Because half of the story is there's a determination from Zacchaeus. I've got to see Jesus, a determination to know who Jesus is. But what we find is that what Luke tells us, Zacchaeus, to be specific, he was not determined to see Jesus. He was determined to see who Jesus is. I'm not sure if you caught that earlier. Well, when you didn't see the words, I guess, but when I read them to you, Zacchaeus had a determination not just to see Jesus. I need to see who Jesus is. And you know what Zacchaeus found? He found out that Jesus was also a determined man. He found out that Jesus was just as determined as Zacchaeus. In fact, Jesus is even more determined than Zacchaeus. The first thing he found was this: Jesus is determined to save the lost. He is determined, I'm going to save the lost. That's who Zacchaeus started finding out who Jesus is. It was in verse 10 that I read to you, where it said at the very end there, he came to seek and save the lost. That word seek in verse 10 is the same word seek found in verse 2, talking about Zacchaeus. When it said that Zacchaeus was seeking to see who Jesus is, that seeking, that determination is used again by Jesus in verse 10, to seek and to save the lost. He is determined. I'm here to save the lost. And Jesus do whatever it takes to follow through on that. He was determined to save the lost, which, by the way, was all of us. We all fit into that category. And it's not something to be taken lightly. It took determination on Jesus' part. In Luke chapter 9, truly, chapter 9 this time. In Luke chapter 9, verse 51, here's what it says. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. I love that. In fact, I had a whole sermon series on it years ago. Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. Why? Because at Jerusalem was the cross where he was going. Jesus had a determination. I want to make it to Jerusalem. I want to make it to that cross, because that's where the finish line is. That's where the goal is. That's the completion to fulfill my Father's will. It's found there. And Jesus set his face to Jerusalem, and nothing was going to hinder him. Nothing was going to stop him. Nothing was going to delay him. I'm making it to Jerusalem. He set his face to do that. Now, I don't want you to think that this determination was a determination because he had no choice or that he didn't want to do this. No, Hebrews tells us the cross was the joy set before him. He was determined to complete this joy that was set before him. And these words that Luke uses about Jesus setting his face are kind of similar, or maybe even borrowed, from Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 50, when Isaiah is prophesying about Jesus, he says this: "But the Lord helps me, therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like a flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame." Jesus set his face like flint to Jerusalem. That word flint, that flint is something that's very tough. It's very hard. And it's used in Scripture to symbolize strength and determination. That's how Jesus' face was, determined to get to Jerusalem. That was the determination that Jesus had to save us. It might have been his joy, but it wasn't easy. Because he sets his face to Jerusalem in Luke chapter 9, and we read the story as we continue on, his journey to get from that point to the cross. We just see everything that Jesus had to go through. He had hardships along the way. He faced demon-possessed people. He faced rejection. He faced sadness over the sins of the people. Not to mention, when he finally got to Jerusalem, he faced betrayal. He faced arrest. He faced beating. He faced all of that. This was not an easy journey. He had plenty of opportunities to say, you know what, this journey is tough, but nonetheless, he had determination. He was going to see it through. He was determined that he was not going to give up. He was determined. It says that Jesus didn't hide his face from those who were torturing him. He didn't turn his face. He kept it locked in to the prize because he's determined. Nothing's going to keep Jesus from what he was set out to do. You know why? Because there are people out there like Zacchaeus who needed Jesus. You know why? Because there are people out there like me and you that needed Jesus.
Yes, I need Jesus.
Thank the Lord for his determination.
Yep.
That he would not give up on people like us. He's going to see it through all the way to the end. I think it's funny because in Mark chapter 10, there's a story where they're walking to Jerusalem. They're actually walking up to Jerusalem. And Mark just puts this in there just for whatever. But it says that Jesus was walking ahead of them. I think Jesus was so determined to get there, the disciples were doing everything they could just to keep up. He was going. Like, guys, I'm going right there. If you want to come, keep coming, but I'm going. He didn't even wait for the disciples. It's right there. That's what I'm here for. He just goes. He's so determined. But remember, one of the obstacles that Zacchaeus might have felt was that he was overlooked. And so it's great that Jesus was determined to save the lost, but it goes beyond that as well. What Zacchaeus also found was this: Jesus is determined to seek you. To seek you. To seek me. He's determined to seek not just the lost, but to make it very individual. Make it very personal. As Zacchaeus was seeking Jesus, Jesus was seeking Zacchaeus. I love that. I love that. And Jesus will do whatever he can to reach those who are trying to get a visitation from him. Last story to wrap this up. There's a story in Mark chapter 4, at the very end of chapter 4. It's a very familiar story because it's a story that starts off by saying, Jesus tells the disciples, hey, let's get in the boat and go to the other side. And what happens? A storm comes up. Almighty big storm. A storm that I'm sure Jesus knew was coming, and he still told the disciples, let's get in the boat and let's go to the other side. This storm was so terrible that even the disciples, most of which were fishermen, were thinking to themselves, we're going to die. And this is it. And Jesus calms the storm. Very familiar story. And the question that I asked myself, why in the world would he have him get in the boat and purposely get into the middle of the storm to try to get to the other side? And the answer is in the very next verse, which starts chapter 5. Chapter 5 of Mark says this: they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains. But he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. This man, who've been tormented by these demon spirits, to a place where the people were like, you know what? We don't want anything to do with this guy. We've tried everything we can. We've chained him. We've done all of this. It's probably fair to say he was not treated very nicely. And when they couldn't do what they wanted to do, they couldn't get rid of the problem, they said, you know what? Let's just stick him out here away from the city so we don't have to deal with it. You know, in a roundabout way, what it sounds like to me? It sounds to me like this man who's possessed by all these demons, he had the same two obstacles as Zacchaeus. Sounds to me like he was treated by people who did not like his reputation, who didn't like who he was, they hated him, and then eventually got overlooked to send him out because we don't know what to do. And for two totally different reasons. But I believe Zacchaeus kind of knew what this man's going through. Sometimes I think we know what he's going through. You might feel the same way. But it goes on. If I jump down to verse 15, we notice he heals the man, okay? He's no longer possessed. In verse 15, and they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. That is where you're supposed to insert praise the Lord right there, right? Because that was a good thing. He's healed, he's better and everything, but it doesn't say that here. It actually says, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And here's what happens. He does. Jesus says, okay, he gets back in the boat and he leaves. I love this story so much because here's what happened. Jesus says, disciples, guys, let's get in the boat. We need to go to the other side. But there's a storm coming. That's okay. What in the world is possessing Jesus so much to get to the other side? There's a guy on the other side who needs me. There's someone on the other side who needs to be set free. Someone on the other side who needs a visitation from Jesus. And Jesus was so determined. He's going to get to the other side. He said, I don't care if I go through all the storms. I will go through the storms for him. And when he's done setting him free and healing him, and then he leaves. It's not like he said, this is the first week of my 10-week conference or anything like that. He didn't say any of that. He went specifically for one reason for that man. Now, Matthew says two guys, but you guys know what I'm saying here. Jesus had a point, and it was to get to that guy because he loved him so much. What Zacchaeus found in Jesus, when he says, I don't want to just see Jesus, I need to see who Jesus is. You know who Jesus is? He's a determined man. He's determined that he's going to get to you, get to you, get to you, get to me. And if he has to go through the storm, he'll go through the storm. If he has to go through the cross, he'll go through the cross. He'll do whatever it takes to get to me and you because he loves us that much. That is a praise the Lord right there. I am so thankful for the determination of Jesus. I'm so thankful he was determined to do the will of his Father. He said, I'm going to go and I'm going to save the lost. I'm going to go and I'm going to find each one individually and I'll get to them however I can. I'm thankful for that because I'm the recipient of that. You're the recipient of that. And what that should cause in us then is the same kind of determination Zacchaeus had. That says, I am determined to get to Jesus. Just for the sake of having Jesus.